Martin Buber shares a story of Rabbi Bear of Radoshitz, who once turned to his teacher, the Seer of Lublin, and said, "Show me one general way to the service of God." And his teacher, the Seer of Lublin, replies and says, "It's impossible to tell people which way they should take. For one way to serve God is through teaching, another way is through prayer, another way is through fasting, another way is through eating. Everyone should carefully observe which way their heart draws them to, and then choose their way with all of their strength. God doesn't say, this way leads to me and this way does not, but rather God says, whatever you do may be a way to me, provided you do it in such a way that it leads you to me." This story, which I was reminded of recently this week, is almost identical, in fact, to a conversation that we had when I was interviewing for this community nearly 10 years ago. I remember talking to the interview panel, and they asked me at the very end of the interview, "Do you have any questions?" And a question popped into my mind that I thought to myself in the space of half a second, if I ask this and it's well received, I may well end up as the rabbi of this community. But if it's not well received, then I've just blown this job interview. But I couldn't help it. And I said to the interviewing panel, I said, "Yeah, I do have a question, actually. My question is God in your community?" And the people who were interviewing me said, "That's a very interesting question. Let's ask someone who's off camera at the time." And that person, Mo Marshan, turned around and said, I couldn't see her, but turned around and said, "Some people in our community find God in prayer services, and some find God in Torah study, and some find God in community, and some find God in social justice, and some don't believe in God. So does that answer your question?" And I actually said, I remember saying to the interview panel, "Before I answer that question, can I just ask, was that the disembodied voice of God?" And they replied, "No, it's the temple president, so basically close enough." For me, actually, it was a very powerful moment, and it seemed to resonate with the panel as well. Because the essence of Reform Judaism is not telling people how you must encounter God. The essence of Reform Judaism is creating space for those who wish to find God, for those who wish to have an encounter. Remember, this is Martin Buber. Buber doesn't define God in his theology. The essence of Buber's theology is in the encounter, in the I-it moment and the I-thou moment. And what that means, very briefly, is for Buber, we tend to spend most of our lives in an I-it encounter. We tend to spend most of our lives separate from everything else around us. And that's actually a healthy way to be. But there are times, very few special times in our lives, when we enter an I-thou encounter moment. That's when we are fully ourselves with the other, and we essentially lose track of where we end and the other begins. And one of the most obvious ways that we have that kind of encounter here in Santa Fe is with the sunset, with these stunning, beautiful sunsets that you find yourself just there, fully with them, and then after a moment realize, wow, I was somewhere else. Buber essentially would describe that as an I-thou moment. And that, according to Buber, is as far as you can go in terms of talking about God. You can't describe God, you can just say that you had an encounter with something, with the eternal thou, with something larger than yourself, or someone larger than yourself. And I think it's really important for us to remember this journey of diversity, of religious diversity. And what's interesting for me as a Reform rabbi is noting how some avenues tend to be more full sometimes, and some avenues tend to be emptier at other times. There seems to be a trend sometimes. For example, let's take a nice example. of going to services, going to Shabbat services. It seems that that avenue of religious exploration is more full on a Friday than on a Saturday, which is actually very interesting for me as a British Jew, because in England it's the other way round. In the UK it's the other way round, that hardly any Jews go to services on a Friday night because they're exhausted, they've had the whole week, they just want to relax. But Saturday morning, they don't have work, so they come, we have the Torah service, and the rabbi gives the sermon then, on the Saturday instead of on the Friday night. Who's right and who's wrong? There is no right and wrong. That's what the Seer of Lublin is trying to explain. So long as it is a way for you to meet God, that's the way, that's the right way. And so I think it's important for us to really pause this week as this story came to my mind. I think it's important for us to pause and reflect on, what is my way? And you may turn around and say, I'm not interested in that journey, and that's fine. I think that's totally appropriate for people who, it's not my place to force religion or force belief in God on anyone. But I do believe that there can be moments of encounter. I do believe that we can open ourselves up to that which is larger than ourselves. And I do believe we have a sort of spiritual personal responsibility to ourselves to explore those differing avenues. And that's why I really love Temple Beth Shalom, because we really give people opportunities to explore differing avenues of differing ways of encountering God. We don't turn around and say, you must be in services to encounter God, although it's lovely to have you in services. We don't say, you must come to Torah study, although it's lovely to have people in Torah study. We don't say, you must do these things. This is the only way to be Jewish. Because it's not. There never has been. In the entire history of Judaism, there have always been differing groups, differing ways of expressing Judaism. And the strength of Reform Judaism, I believe, is in celebrating that, not in denying it. Tomorrow, our Shabbat Shacharit is very different. Our Torah study is very different, in that it's not taking place as usual. Instead, we're going to be at Pride on the Plaza, the 30th Pride on the Plaza. This is the second year in a row when we have a stand at Pride on the Plaza. And this is really important for me and for us as a community, because we're celebrating our diverse members. We're celebrating everyone who forms that rich tapestry of our community. The tagline for our community is "Come as you are." We celebrate everyone for who they are, not for who we think they should be, not for the way that they should behave. We celebrate everyone for their unique journey, their life journey, what they bring to the community as themselves, as someone created in the image of God. We truly believe that everyone who walks through our doors is made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And therefore, they are a gift to us, as much as we hope we can be a gift to them. Abraham Joshua Heschel talked, when he marched with Martin Luther King, talked of praying with his feet. And so instead of praying with our mouths, with the liturgy, tomorrow we're praying with our feet at the plaza, celebrating God's wondrous diversity and the wondrous diversity of the Jewish community. There isn't Torah study, so that people can go and can be there and help celebrate. But I have mentioned in the e-digest a book that I strongly recommend about Judaism and homosexuality in the Jewish tradition. It's a fascinating, wonderful, liberating read. And I can recommend many other books on queering topics as members wish. So please, if you want to know more, please do feel free to be in touch. I have a whole section of my library, which is a fascinating section on how to reread texts which were mistranslated and which were misinterpreted according to particular patriarchal and homophobic biases, and also how to go beyond the Torah text and define Judaism in a different way. So I encourage you to join us tomorrow. Of course, join us tonight as well, but I encourage you to join us tomorrow And I encourage you to celebrate the diversity of our Jewish community, because especially in Reform Judaism, it's our diversity that makes us strong. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.